Welcome to Faith, Fiction, and Folklore, or as we like to call it, the Tri-F podcast, where we try not to mess the podcast up. Now, today, I have been spending the last little bit trying to put together a reaction or a review of The Religion Business. And The Religion Business is a docuseries by, let me show the picture of the fella here, Nathan Apffel. Nathan Apffel. There he is. And there is a thumbnail for his documentary, The Religion Business. This is a very interesting documentary because I fell into the rabbit hole of trying to decide how to address the 10 points that he brings up in this documentary series. And what I eventually decided to do was basically not to fall for that, not to basically give in to trying to defend things that are not defensible, because some of the fraud issues, about a third of them, I think, are like pretty obviously fraud. The rest of them kind of fall on a spectrum of, okay, that's seedy, to, okay, that's probably something, but you haven't proved it, and everything in between. So I didn't want to make the mistake, and I almost did, or at least as I was trying to figure out how to review this, I almost made this tactical error of trying to defend each individual case, which I didn't really want to do because I do think that these guys are committing fraud. So it would have been like a waste of time to try to defend all that, because the chances are, yeah, most of it probably is seedy and, awful. So I didn't want to go there, but this is a very hard documentary to review or to refute, because it's one of those things where it's like every single instance that the guy brings up could be right. But at the same time, the entire documentary itself is really wrong because of its whole general premise. And this is what's very... I don't know if he's doing it on purpose, but the problem with the documentary is that it's not fair to call it a bait and switch, because it does talk about fraud, and that is what it promises to talk about. And so, yes, fraud is mentioned, it is shown, and that's what got me into the documentary in the beginning, because we were, looking and reacting to Mike Winger's stuff, and I thought this would be a good addition to everything we'd been talking about since we were, reviewing some of Mike Winger's videos. But the problem is even though it does talk about fraud, its argument really isn't about fraud. And he uses a word, a specific word, in a very slippery way. And this is where things get dicey. So he complains about systems. And the fraud that he brings up, the fraud that is probably legitimate that he brings up, is all housed in making this cumulative case that the system is broken. And yes, there certainly is a system broken that is making all of this fraud possible. The question is, what system is that? Well, Nathan obviously believes the church system is the problem, and I respectfully disagree. There's something that has to be understood before you even get into this, because the documentary, it's just tricky. It's a tricky little series, because there's a lot of good stuff in it. You end up agreeing with a lot of it, but then there's some other things where I do feel like there was deceptive edits, and I do feel like there were things taken out of context that felt like they had more context. I didn't think that he was entirely straightforward, and the whole problem with the documentary series as a whole is that it takes big numbers and shocking information and kind of presents it in a void to color it in the worst way possible. And if you don't know anything about history, if you don't know anything about why these things are done, it looks really, really, really bad. And this becomes tricky because you don't want to fall into the trap of defending the guys doing these things because the individual guys are committing the fraud. But at the same time, you do have to point out that the system is not the problem because the individual things that they are doing are not unprecedented or unheard of. So they do exist within an ecosystem. They are being taken advantage of. I'll cut to the end of my spiel right now and basically say the system that I think needs to be corrected is the IRS system, is the tax code, not the churches. Because basically the churches and the government are doing the same thing. And so the government's really only mad at the Kenneth Copelands of the world because they're like, hey, this is our gig. How dare you figure out a way to utilize it for yourself? We want that money. So my problem with this documentary, in the simplest terms, is to use the analogy. I mean, I was going to use it anyway, but to use the analogy that one of the women in the documentary uses, there's a fox in the hen house. I'm like, yeah, there are foxes in the hen house, but asking the government to come in and regulate the hen house is like inviting more foxes to repair the hen house. You've just got more bad guys coming in to make the problem worse because what's going to happen is basically these foxes are going to come in, take a chunk of your donations as a tax revenue, and then indoctrinate your kids into something stupid even further. I'll circle back to that, but I wanted to just get that out in the open. So to get back to my point, the individual things that you hear about in this documentary do not exist in a void. They are things that religious organizations have done for forever. The problem is the dollar amount. The problem is the fact that the churches are not telling you where your money is going. It's the ambiguity. It's the fact that everything's kind of hidden in the shadows, but it's not specifically what the guys are doing. So, for example, he makes a big deal about the Mormon church, the LDS church, buying stock. Well, buying stock is part of scaling donations. Like, that's not new. So if you, for example, let me just pull an example up here. In 1796, George Washington donated 100 shares of the James River and Kanawha Canal Company to Liberty Hall Academy in Lexington, Virginia, to fund its development. The institution was subsequently renamed Washington Academy, now Washington and Lee University, in his honor, representing a massive endowment at the time. So philanthropists, churches, religious organizations, they would buy stock to fund institutions long term. This is a matter of scaling donations. And when people scale donations, they buy businesses, they buy stock, they give stock. Donors will give stock, and they will keep it as an endowment, they'll keep so many shares for a cause or whatever. So people haven't just given money, and people start businesses to fund causes. And frankly, this is how you get libraries, this is how you get colleges, this is how you get universities, this is how you get orphanages, this is how you get schools, this is how you get things en masse. Okay, so this is how you help a lot of people all at once, and this is not new, and this is not unprecedented, and it's gone on literally since the Middle Ages. So just to quote AI again, churches have a long history of using businesses, land, and financial instruments to fund operations, transitioning from medieval land rents to modern stock investments to commercial enterprises. While historically supported by taxes and donations, many denominations now use investment portfolios and commercial businesses to fund charities, institutions, and missionary work, the Latter-day Saints being a primary example. So, yeah, and you see here a little further down, medieval and early America. For centuries, churches relied on land rents and, in early America, tax dollars, or in the case of New England, church membership functioning as a form of shareholding. So, this is something that's happened for a very long time. And he kind of paints the picture like the LDS is just hoarding money for its own sake. It's like, well, maybe they are, but the means by which they're doing that is a these are traditions that are older than America itself. So it's a little silly to sit there and get mad at the church system when everybody's been doing this for forever. Now, there's a reason why this has all gotten corrupt. It has nothing to do with the system itself. But he kind of paints this image that the system itself is the problem. And so just to show as an example of what I'm talking about, the best parts of the documentary series are the parts where he's in Africa and he's showing how these smaller organizations work. And he's talking about somebody named Sister Rosemary. And Sister Rosemary was a highlight of the documentary series. Now, the way that she makes her operation go is basically, she's helping like war refugees from Uganda. And the way that she makes everything work is that she has 50% donations and 50% like profit type things. And one of her profit mechanisms is the girls that she's helping make clothing for the community, for the schools in the area, and they sell that. And so through basically having small businesses and a combination of small businesses and donations, they're able to help so many people in a given year. Now, if somebody was to be unscrupulous, they might record those girls working on them sewing machines, record their dorms if they have them, play sinister music in the background and go, "Oh my goodness, Sister Rosemary's running a sweatshop." Now, she's obviously not, and Nathan doesn't present her as such. He puts her in a favorable light and lets her have her say, and she's doing wonderful work. But my point is, she is implementing the same principle at a much smaller scale. You basically start businesses and you basically create little ways to make money to get these kind of large-scale operations up and running. That is what you do. America's just had a tradition of doing that for hundreds of years, and so it's gotten really big over time. And it's gotten like ludicrous because of the IRS system, not because of the church system, but we'll get to that here in a minute. But it's gotten really big over the years. America's just been at it longer. But she's doing the same thing. And what's really frustrating about that sequence with Sister Rosemary is he misses an excellent opportunity to ask the obvious million-dollar question. Because at one point he asks her if she is getting any money from the Catholic Church, and she says no. Now, Sister Rosemary is obviously a nun, and she's got this operation, but if I understood the documentary right, she's pulling this, everything that she's doing, she's getting the money from individual donations and her little businesses that she's running in Uganda. Well, why isn't the Catholic Church sending her money? Because that's kind of the point. That's the point of having these churches and these big organizations that pull money like this, is they are supposed to bring all that money into one spot and then funnel it down to different operations. And Sister Rosemary should be one of those operations. And so, at one point she wanted to help some kids in Sudan. Her default mentality was to go, well, I'm going to go knock on doors in America, which is fine. But since she's Catholic, in my mind, it would make sense for her to be going, hey, Catholic Church, I want to do blah, blah, blah. I need so much money to pull that off. So her first resource should be the Catholic Church. She should be asking them for money, and they should be giving the money to her before she goes and starts knocking on doors. That's how the thing is supposed to work, and that's how it's worked traditionally. That's how the Catholics got to Uganda. And yet, that isn't happening, and Nathan didn't ask anything about that, and I was quite astonished given the premise of his documentary. Now, there's another point I want to bring up, and it's one kind of bleeds into the other. I don't want to presume Nathan's salvation or to question where he's at in his faith. I don't feel like that would be appropriate or my place. But I guess I am, but I'm not. Let me just say what bothered me. What bothered me is at one point in episode 7, because here's how this progression worked. Episode 1, I was skeptical. By episode 6, and episode 6 is the highlight of the documentary series, I'm almost won over, right? By episode 7, though, he jumps the shark. And what he does is he starts out the episode by quoting Isaiah, and then he turns around and says, oh, but, my truth is your truth, or like truth is relative. Now, anybody who's, like, I would expect a high schooler who doesn't know his faith very well to say that, but anybody who's been in these Christian circles for, like, a long period of time, that's, like, one of the worst things you can say in a church, like, because we consider Christ to be the truth, right? So what, is Christ relative now? Like, the whole your truth and my truth and truth is relative thing, like, I have a very hard time understanding how a Christian is going to, like, say that. And I certainly am, for the record, if he's hoping to convince Christians, that's about the worst thing that you can say to a Christian, because all of us who are around for the angry atheist movement in the 2010s are going to sit there and go, the truth is relative. Well, are you relatively sure or absolutely sure? I mean, it's a dumb thing to say, and I don't know why he said it. It didn't really tie into anything else in the documentary. It just called into question. It's like, okay, are you really a concerned insider, or is this something else? And I bring it up because the solution to this problem in his mind is the introduction of the government. And look, as mentioned, that's kind of like calling in, if you have a fox in a hen house, that's kind of like calling in more foxes into the hen house to fix it. Like, you're just making the problem worse. So, but that kind of idea is built on a very dangerous presupposition. Number one, it's built on the idea that secularism is somehow morally neutral or superior to religion. Now, anybody who is a Christian who has dealt with secular people for a long period of time, that's just as much an ideology as anything else. Like, secularism is not a neutral playing field in any way, shape, or form. They have their own ideology, they have their own worldview, they have their own moral ethos, which is basically truth is relative. So you don't want those people in charge of your churches. Like, you don't want more regulation in the church, because bear in mind, let's think about this for a minute. Not 5 years ago, these people were arresting preachers for going to churches. Like, people went to jail during COVID for going to church, but the strip clubs stayed open. And Nathan is wanting oversight from that same bunch of people. Again, he is incensed about Kenneth Copeland, but the IRS, like the guys that are supposed to be watching over all this, threw Ken Hovind in jail for, if not nearly 10 years over taking money from the wrong account, and yet they've left Kenneth Copeland alone, except they almost did something during 2008, but then the housing crisis happened and they just sort of forgot. The guys who created that juxtaposition, he wants in charge of regulating the churches. That is not a solution. That is going to just make things worse, because the system that really needs to be complained about is the tax system itself. The answer to his question is, why is a nonprofit, number one, allowed to make a profit? Number two, why is a nonprofit called a 501c3? It's because the system is designed to be ambiguous. The tax system is designed to maximize fraud and at the same time turn everybody that's a dissident into a criminal overnight. That's the point of it. The ambiguity is the point. Have you seen Minnesota lately? Like, the government has been performing fraud in one state that's enough to make Kenneth Copeland blush. And yet his idea for a solution is to have those guys come in and create accountability. They're not going to keep anything accountable. They're just going to take your taxpayer dollars and then turn around and use it to indoctrinate your kid. That's what they do. So Blaming a system that has been around since the Middle Ages is not the answer to the problem. Okay, what has essentially happened is the government has taken over the church's job, and the churches are now fat, as he's described them, because they have nothing to do. But the church used to play a specific role in society. It used to be the one funding the hospitals and the orphanages and the universities and the schools. And the government had a hard time building a canal. But now we give all that money to the government, and the churches, there's been this culture kind of created in society at large, and that's bled over into the church, where, well, now just the government takes care of that. We have social programs now. And so the church has lost its role. And so you've got to, he sits there and appeals to this saying, which is complete crap, by the way. He says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. First of all, that's not true. I don't think Hitler wanting to create a master race was a good intention. Furthermore, I have a saying of my own. Idle hands make the devil's workshop. The church has lost its role in society, and it's defaulted its rightful function to the government, and that's how we've gotten here in the first place. And so this is a very difficult documentary to review because he is right that there is a systemic problem, and he is right that there is fraud, but the solution is not introducing the government in for regulations. And he doesn't seem to understand that that's how we got here in the first place. Like, this overly elaborate, overly complicated tax system is what caused all this, and yet his solution is to add even more rules and more regulation and more stuff into an already convoluted system. And it just bothers me because the answer to the question is in the fact, why is a nonprofit called a 501c3? Why give something plain a number? It's to hide. It's to hide. The ambiguity is the point. And Uncle Sam did that. And Uncle Sam has created this elaborate NGO structure and this elaborate social program structure to raid the freaking U.S. currency and to rob the American people of their purchasing power, and that's a whole other thing. But fraud is a feature, not a bug in this system. So if you're wanting to fix the churches, you've got one of two possible solutions. You can either get into politics and try to introduce something like Herman Cain did, that 999 tax solution or something like that, and try to simplify everything to get rid of the fraud, because simplifying things is how you get rid of this stuff. Or you can create a change in the church culture. So I am just old enough to remember how things used to be. And when I was a kid, we still had kind of the last vestigial remains of the circuit rider culture, even though we were Southern Baptist. But this is the way things used to be done in Protestant churches. So circuit rider, Methodist ministerial role that was originated in England by John Wesley. The first of the American circuit riders was Robert Strawbridge, who arrived in the colonies in 1764. A few years later, Wesley sent missionaries to the American colonies, but most of them departed when revolution threatened. One who remained was Francis Ashbury, who, as Wesley's general assistant, was responsible for organizing the circuits. Each circuit of congregations, sometimes comprising as many as 25 or 30 meeting places, was under the supervision of a Methodist conference preacher who might have several lay assistants, and a young man who could preach and was willing to ride a horse for weeks over wild country might become an assistant, and finally a circuit rider. Circuit riders were numbered by about 100 by the end of the American Revolution. The salary was $64 a year until 1800, when it was raised to $100, with the horse furnished. Circuit riders were a religious and moral force along the frontier and in rural areas of the South, and they were largely responsible for the propagation of Methodism throughout the United States. The practice was soon adopted by other denominations too. So, obviously we didn't have circuit riders back in the day, but the church tradition when I was a kid was that a pastor didn't stay long. You never had a permanent pastor. So you would have a pastor that would show up for 3 or 4 years, and then he would move along, and then you'd have another pastor show up for 3 or 4 years, and then he would move along. And so you didn't have this kind of system in old Protestant denominations where the preacher was like authoritative in any particular sense. And when a preacher gave a sermon, and this was kind of justified because, you didn't know the guy, he wasn't always a local member of the community that had been there for 40 years, you had a placard on either side of the podium. And that placard showed the church members, the church attendance, how many members were missing on any given Sunday, and how much money was made for the week versus how much money was made for the month. And when I was a kid, being the snarky little individual I was, I kind of thought this was bragging. As you get older, though, you realize this is accountability. They presented their numbers every week. And so what has to happen is the church needs to get back into the habit of actually checking on the numbers and expecting accountability. And that is not reinventing the wheel, because in the 90s at least, that was still a normal part of church life. The issue is these guys are now in the habit of hiding their numbers. And really, fixing that would fix 90% of this. But you've got another issue as well. You've got authoritative doctrines and the power of celebrity. Now, he does address the power of celebrity in the non-denominational churches in his docuseries, but he doesn't, in my opinion, he doesn't seem to hit hard enough on that and what it's going to take to remove that, because that is a major aspect of the problem. But it's more than just the power of celebrity. I would say the power of celebrity is relevant to the non-denominational churches. The good thing about that, though, is that I don't see the power of celebrity lasting a whole lot longer. With YouTube and the internet being what it is, I kind of see the celebrity aspect of being on television or just being able to talk kind of dwindling with time. Sooner or later, the internet and television screens and all this, they're just going to be another stump. And so that mystique is going to continue to fade with time. It would probably serve us well to speed that up, though. But either way, that isn't going to last for forever. That is going to vanish. The main issue, though, with a lot of this church corruption, though, is an authoritative culture. Look at what the Mormon Church, the Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Pentecostal movement, what do they all have in common? They have like a divine authority component to their leaders. So, the Catholic Church is the Pope. The Greek Orthodox, I believe it's called an apostolic succession. The Mormons, you can't argue with the president. The president's word is final. And in the Pentecostal movement, you have the divine anointing, which is manifested through miracles. Now, this kind of like divine authority doctrine creates a stigma against asking the preacher where the money goes. And that's how you get these absurdly, like, it's not a coincidence that these guys are massively wealthy and you have this divine authority doctrine. I would argue there's a correlation, because regardless of whether the Southern Baptist Convention is corrupt now, Southern Baptists do not have this problem on this kind of scale. The Methodists do not have this problem on this kind of scale. And it's because we don't treat our preachers like they're divinely authoritative. In fact, we're about 3 steps from kicking them out at any given moment, which might be a problem in and of itself, but it ain't that problem. So the answer to this is not incorporating the government. It's not having everybody fill out a 990. The answer to all of this is changing the church culture itself, reintroducing what was already a tradition for hundreds of years. And that's just asking the preacher where the money's going, putting the placards back up on either side of the podium. That tells you the number of church members, how many members were gone, and, the money you made for the week versus the money you made for the month. And anybody who's financially minded can look at those numbers from week to week and figure out if any funny business is going on. And so this is a change that has to happen on the local level, and it's not unheard of. It's not like it can't happen. It's already existed, and it hasn't even been gone for a generation. So it's just reintroducing the role of the congregation back into the church. I mean, how many churches are still having business meetings from week to week, and the congregation is expected to vote as a whole on whatever given issue, be it money, be it the church carpet, that old cliche of the church that's dead fighting about the color of the carpet? Well, those fights took place during the church business meeting. So why isn't that? Is that still being implemented? Is that implemented in non-denominational churches? If it's not, it should be. And given that this is the age of the internet, and I can ask on a YouTube poll what your favorite color is, there is no blasted reason why a church can't have the whole congregation vote on things, or at the very least have the board or have individuals that represent them voted in to make decisions like that. Make decisions about money and carpets and so on. So that, in my opinion, is the answer to a lot of these problems that he addresses in this series. And if it wasn't for episode 7, well, that's not even true. I want to recommend this series because there's a lot of good information in it. And episode 6 is particularly powerful, and I really liked it. But there's a lot of bad information, just as a little thing. This is a little thing. The idea that most people couldn't read in the Middle Ages, 6%. Some scholars says 6% of people can't read. That's not true. People back then could read. The issue was they couldn't read Latin because the Catholic Church kept the Bible in Latin. William Tyndale was burned at the stake in 1536 for translating the Bible into English. The reason the Catholic Church thought that was a big deal was because people could read English. That was the whole problem. So it just doesn't make any sense to sit there and say, well, so few people could read back then. It was just crazy. What a bunch of dullards. And I hate that line because it just feeds into this narrative that everybody was stupid before the light bulb. It annoys me, and there's a lot of little stuff like that in there that's just not right. And I think there's some edits in there that I would consider to be pretty deceptive. It's like having a turd in a punch bowl. There's a lot of good stuff in it, but there's a lot of bad stuff in it too. And quite frankly, if you're wanting to learn about church fraud, Mike Winger has just done it better. I hate to be snarky, but that's just true. I mean, I still think he was wrong about the Michael Brown thing, but, overall, Mike Winger's stuff is fantastic, and you're going to get a much better understanding of the problem from him. But the main takeaway from this video, and the reason I'm putting out this review, is because Kenneth Copeland, for example, owning an oil rig is not bad. Pentecostals buying farmland and raising cows and chickens is not bad. The LDS Church buying stock is not bad. That is how you scale donations. That is not prosperity, whatever, going amok. That's not the problem. That's how you scale donations. That's how you help a lot of people all at once. And look, if you're going to sit there and say, all right, we got to tear this whole thing down. Okay, well, how many people are going to go hungry? I mean, really? And let's assume the worst. Let's say that 1% of the money going to, the church is donating is actually going to the causes that's supposed to be going to. How much is that 1% in comparison to the other churches who haven't built these systems? Okay. Now, should we fix the fraud? Yes, obviously, of course. I'm not advocating for the fraud. But to sit there and complain about the system as if the system is the cause of the fraud, and then to sit there and turn around like we need to burn that system down when it's already helping more people en masse than was done in the past. And frankly, it's how Western civilization was built. You may not like that, but without this system, you don't get universities, you don't get libraries, you don't get schools, you don't get orphanages, you don't get these social programs. The government actually copied this system and turned it into some Frankenstein nightmare and left the church without its proper role in society. That's how we got here. And so tearing down the system in favor of the counterfeit the government has put together is a stupid idea. So, I'm not saying take the moral trade-off. We do need to fix it. But I will say this. I would rather have Kenneth Copeland buy his stupid mansion and have his stupid planes that he may or may not need than have the government to take a portion of the people's donations because they need to pay for the regulation. And then they turn around and use that money to indoctrinate my kid. All right, if I'm going to sit there and make a lesser of two evils argument, I would rather have a Kenneth Copeland than giving Uncle Sam more money to teach secular doctrine, which is not neutral. So there's that. But again, and I feel like I have to say this to the point of redundancy because people will, try to sit there and say that I'm for fraud or some such thing. I'm not for fraud. Get rid of the fraud. Create the accountability needed to get rid of the fraud. But that accountability has to take place in the congregation. And people have to accept that sometimes talking to individuals and getting stuff done on the local level is going to be more effective than just trying to jump to the hub known as Uncle Sam. So with that said, I'm going to wrap this up. I have a lot more to say on the topic. I may or may not say it later. I don't know. But for now, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Faith, Fiction, and Folklore. If you did, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Rumble. We can also be found on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Thank you again very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.